The stonecutter woke before the sun, not because he was eager, but because his body no longer questioned the rhythm of repetition. Morning after morning, the same chill greeted him as he stepped outside his modest home, the valley still wrapped in shadow. The cliffs stood unmoved in the distance, indifferent, patient, in a way only stone can be. This was his world. Rock, dust, and the steady echo of a hammer meeting stone. He had been cutting stone for most of his life, not the kind of work that invites admiration or applause. There were no crowds watching him carve away at stubborn surfaces, no celebrations when a block was shaped just right. His days were measured in strikes, not milestones, in effort, not recognition. The stonecutter believed in consistency the way others believed in luck or talent. You show up, you do the work, you return tomorrow and do it again. To him, discipline was not something you talked about. It was something you practiced quietly, especially when no one was watching. Yet beneath that belief lived a quieter longing. He wanted assurance, not praise, but confirmation, a sign that his steady hands and aching muscles were building toward something meaningful. He rarely allowed himself to name that desire. Wanting proof felt like weakness. Still, it waited there, unspoken. Each day, he lifted his tools and worked the same section of stone. Some days, progress was visible, a clean edge, a smoother surface. Other days, nothing seemed to change at all. The rock resisted him without explanation. Those were the hardest days. The days when consistency felt less like strength and more like stubbornness. People passed through the valley from time to time. They nodded politely, sometimes remarking on his persistence. Their words never lingered. They moved on, and the stonecutter remained, alone with his work and his thoughts. At night, as he cleaned the dust from his hands, a question surfaced more often than he cared to admit. What if showing up every day wasn't enough? Still, when morning came, he rose again, not with certainty, but with discipline. And in that discipline, he held on to the belief that unseen strength, like stone, is shaped slowly, one quiet strike at a time. Change did not arrive suddenly. It never does for those who live by repetition. It came quietly, in the form of small differences the stonecutter almost missed at first. A cleaner line where the stone once resisted, a block that split exactly where he intended. The work began to respond, not dramatically, but faithfully. He noticed it in his hands before he noticed it in the results. His strikes grew more precise, his movements less strained. Years of disciplined effort had taught his body what his mind no longer needed to think about. There was a rhythm now, steady and confident, as if the stone and the hammer had finally learned to speak the same language. Others began to notice as well. Travelers passing through the valley seemed to watch him. Local builders started requesting his stone specifically, trusting the reliability of his craft. They spoke of his patience, his consistency, the way his work held together when others failed. Each word landed safely, but together they formed something unfamiliar: recognition. The stonecutter accepted it with quiet humility. He did not boast. He did not carefully, counting the blocks completed, noticing how often his work was chosen over others. He told himself this was natural, harmless. Proof, after all, did not have to corrupt purpose. It could simply confirm it. Yet slowly, without his awareness, a shift took place. Consistency, once practiced for its own sake, started leaning toward expectation. Each successful strike carried the quiet hope that the next would land just as cleanly. Each finished stone became evidence not just of skill, but of worth. The stonecutter stood taller now, worked longer hours. He believed he had earned this confidence, and perhaps he had. Discipline had carried him forward, just as he always believed it would. What he did not see was how tightly he had begun to hold the outcome, and how fragile belief can become when strength starts depending on results rather than the work itself. Asterisk. The fall did not come from laziness or neglect. It came on a day that began like any other. The stonecutter had been given an important commission larger than anything he had worked on before. A cornerstone meant to anchor a new structure rising at the edge of the valley. It was the kind of work that carried weight, both literal and symbolic. His hands did not shake when he accepted it. He trusted the consistency that had never failed him. For days, he worked with focus and restraint. Each strike measured, each pause intentional. The stone resisted more than usual, but he saw that as part of the process. Growth always asked for more before it gave anything back. Then, in a moment too small to prepare for, everything changed. A single fracture split the stone in the wrong direction. The sound was sharp, final, a clean break, but not the one he needed. He stood frozen, staring at the ruined block, his breath caught somewhere between disbelief and denial. He tried to salvage it, worked the edges, adjusted the plan, but stone does not forget its breaking point. The damage had already decided the outcome. Word spread quickly. The commission was reassigned, not unkindly, but decisively. Others stepped in, offering quicker solutions, easier promises. The stonecutter watched from a distance as the work continued. Without him, the valley felt different after that, quieter, heavier. The days that followed were the hardest he had known. His tools felt unfamiliar in his hands. Strikes landed without conviction. The same consistency that once carried him forward now echoed hollowly against unyielding stone. He replayed the moment endlessly. One strike, one mistake. Years of discipline undone by a single fracture. Doubt settled in where pride once lived. If consistency had been enough before, why had it failed now? Had he trusted it too much? Had patience blinded him to risk? At night, sleep refused to come easily. His thoughts circled the same questions, offering no answers. The work that once defined him now felt like an accusation. Failure, he realized, does not always arrive as chaos. Sometimes it arrives quietly, breaking something you believed was unbreakable. And as the stonecutter returned each morning to the same unchanging valley, he carried a new weight with him. Not the weight of stone, but the weight of doubt, heavy, unmoving, and impossible to ignore. Asterisk, he did not leave the valley. If anything, the stonecutter worked more than before. Longer hours, fewer pauses. He returned to the same blocks of stone with a force that looked like determination but felt closer to defiance. Discipline remained, but its purpose had shifted. What once grounded him now drove him. He refused to accept that the failure meant anything beyond effort. If one fracture had undone him, then more strikes would correct it. That was his reasoning. He repeated the same routines with greater intensity, believing repetition alone could erase what had happened. But something was different. His movements lacked patience. Each strike carried urgency, anger. The stone resisted, not because it always had, but because he was no longer listening. He demanded progress instead of allowing it. Consistency became endurance without reflection. In his mind, the failure replayed endlessly. Every moment felt like a miscalculation. Every choice became evidence against himself. The valley, once familiar and steady, now mirrored his inner tension and changing, but unforgiving. Others noticed the shift. Builders stopped asking for his work. Conversations grew shorter. Some offered quiet sympathy, which he dismissed with polite distance. Sympathy implied acceptance, and acceptance felt like surrender. At night, exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but rest brought no relief. He lay awake, questioning every belief he once held sacred. Perhaps consistency was naive. Perhaps discipline only mattered when things went well. The strength he trusted so deeply now felt fragile, conditional, yet still. He stayed. Leaving would mean admitting that effort could fail without explanation. That discipline did not guarantee reward. That scared him more than the silence, more than the broken stone. So he clung to the past, to who he had been when things were good. He measured himself by outcomes that no longer arrived, and punished himself for their absence. The stone remained unchanged, and beneath his relentless effort, something else took root: quiet exhaustion, deep rooted fatigue, the kind that comes from resisting reality rather than working with it. Strength, stripped of flexibility, becomes something else entirely, and the stonecutter, without realizing it, was slowly chiseling himself into a shape that could no longer move forward at its risk. The encounter came without announcement, on an afternoon that held no intention of change. The stonecutter had wandered beyond his usual path, carrying his tools more out of habit than purpose. At the far edge of the valley, where stone broke unevenly and most workers refused to labor, he noticed someone sitting in the dust. An older man, hunched but steady, carving small pieces of rock with deliberate calm. The stonecutter stopped. The work was unimpressive by ordinary standards. No grand shapes, no perfect edges, just small, simple forms, rounded, imperfect, quietly intentional. "You won't get much from stone like that," the stonecutter said, his voice firm but not unkind. The old man smiled without looking up. "I'm not asking it to be more than it is." The words, there was no urgency in his movements, no frustration. Each mark seemed less about progress and more about presence. "Doesn't it bother you?" the stonecutter asked. "When the stone doesn't become what you hoped?" The old man set his tools down gently. "Hope is heavy when you tie it to results," he replied. "I work to understand the stone. What it becomes is a conversation, not a demand." The stonecutter felt something loosen inside his chest. For so long, failure had felt like judgment, proof that discipline had limits. But here was someone working without fear of outcome, consistent, without expectation. "I failed," the stonecutter said quietly, surprised by his own honesty. The old man nodded. "Then you learned where force ends and patience begins." There was no pity in his tone, no instruction, just truth offered without weight as the sun lowered behind the cliffs. The stonecutter stood longer than he intended, watching the slow rhythm of hands that worked without bargaining. When he finally turned back toward the valley, he carried nothing new in his hands, but something had shifted for the first time since the fracture. Consistency felt possible again, not as proof, but as presence. And that afternoon, the valley felt quieter, not empty, inviting. Change did not arrive with clarity. It arrived with permission. The stonecutter did not wake the next morning with answers or confidence restored. What he woke with was softer a willingness to stop fighting the work as if it owed him something. He returned to the valley not to prove himself, but to meet the stone as it was. He began by slowing down. He chose smaller blocks, ones he would have ignored before, not because they promised success, but because they asked for attention. His strikes were gentler now, less insistent. When the stone resisted, he paused instead of forcing it. For the first time in weeks, his breath stayed steady. He allowed mistakes to exist without punishment. Some days, nothing changed. No visible progress. No clean edges to admire. And strangely, that no longer frightened him. Waiting no longer demanded justification. It became a practice, again quiet, honest, grounded. Discipline returned. But not as rigidity. It showed up as consistency, without expectation, as showing up even when the outcome felt uncertain. He worked shorter hours, rested without guilt, trusting that presence mattered more than pressure. He noticed details he had once rushed past, the way sunlight revealed fine cracks in the stone, how texture changed under different angles of force. Growth, he realized, had never disappeared. He had simply been too focused on results to recognize its quieter language. Failure no longer felt like erasure. It felt like part of the landscape, a teacher rather than a verdict. Weeks passed, and small signs of progress emerged. Not dramatic, not impressive, but honest. A curve shaped just right, a surface smoothed without resistance. Each success felt lighter because it no longer carried the burden of meaning. The stonecutter felt something return, not pride, but peace. Consistency no longer asked to be seen. It asked only to be practiced. And in releasing his grip on outcomes, he felt strength rise again. Not the rigid kind that breaks under pressure, but the kind that bends, adapts, and endures. For the first time, the work felt whole, and he sensed, quietly, that this was the beginning of something new. The valley did not change. The stone remained heavy. The air still carried dust. The mountains still stood unmoved by human effort, but something within the stonecutter had settled into alignment, and that changed everything. He no longer measured his days by how much stone he broke. He measured them by how fully he arrived. Each morning, he walked the same familiar path, yet it felt different now, not lighter, but steadier. His body moved with quiet confidence, his hands guided by understanding rather than urgency. There was no rush to reach the end of the task. The work unfolded at its own pace, and he allowed himself to unfold with it. Others noticed before he did. A younger worker paused one afternoon, watching how the stonecutter waited between strikes, how he listened to the stone instead of overpowering it. No advice was offered, none was needed. Presence had become instruction. The stonecutter's work began to change shape, not faster, not grander, but clearer, truer. Each block carried intention rather than strength. What emerged was not perfection, but harmony between effort and rest, discipline and compassion, strength and patience. For the first time, he felt a clear, thin detachment. Success no longer defined him. Failure no longer threatened him. Growth became part of the steady, quiet rhythm. He understood now that transformation did not arrive as a breakthrough, arrived as balance in the evening. He sat outside his modest home, watching the sky dim into soft blue. His body was tired, but not depleted. His thoughts no longer raced ahead or lingered behind. He existed where he stood. Purpose revealed itself gently, not as ambition, but as alignment. He was not carving stone to prove his worth. He was carving because it was what he did with care, consistency, and calm resolve. And that was enough. The stonecutter smiled once, barely noticing. Peace had entered his life without announcement, and in that stillness, he understood something he had once chased relentlessly. True strength is not loud. It does not demand recognition. It grows quietly, through showing up again and again without resistance. The dawn arrived the next morning, as it always had, but now he was ready to meet it. And so, this story gently returns to you, because somewhere in your own life, you may recognize the stonecutter's hand, steady, uncertain, yet still willing to try again. You may be carrying work that feels invisible, effort that seems unrewarded, days that blur together without applause or proof of progress. This journey leaves behind a few quiet truths worth holding close. Patience is not weakness. It is strength practiced over time. Consistency does not shout, it endures. Failure is not the opposite of progress, it is part of its design. Discipline becomes sustainable only when softened with compassion. Letting go of urgency creates space for clarity. Purpose is not found in outcomes, but in presence. Transformation rarely arrives. Suddenly it forms, slowly, through repetition. Peace comes when you stop demanding proof from time. If you are in a season where nothing seems to be changing, remember this: stone does not crack at the first strike, nor the second, nor the 100th. Yet every strike matters. The journey is working on you. Even when the results remain unseen, you are not behind, you are becoming. So continue to show up. Continue to apply gentle discipline. Continue to trust that what you are building within yourself does not require an audience. Rebirth often happens quietly, disguised as routine, hidden inside ordinary days. And when doubt whispers that your effort is meaningless, remember the stonecutter. Remember the strength that grows unnoticed. Remember that consistency is not about forcing change, it is about allowing it. If this story brought you a moment of calm or clarity, consider sharing it with someone who may need reassurance today. Like the video if it gave you peace, and subscribe for more stories that honor the quiet power within us all, because some of the strongest transformations happen slowly, and they are no less powerful for it.